G'day again everyone, welcome back to the vlog. It's currently about 2:30 p.m. in the Gold Coast and I've just woken up, played cash pretty late last night, so definitely needed to have a bit of a sleep in before I go and play cash again tonight. Before we get into any more poker, I need to cook something up to eat, so let's get eating. So I got a feed in and I'm feeling much better. Gonna hit up the gym now, not only to make some gains, but also I feel like it's good to do some type of physical exercise before you play poker in the day. I really feel like it gets out a lot of the nervous jitters and gets your mind a bit more clear and focused on the game itself. So that's gonna be the plan. We're doing a leg workout. We're gonna have to make do with a hotel gym, which is notoriously pretty bad, but no excuses to not get a training session in. Let's hit the gym. Leg workout done. So happy that I actually got some exercise in. Now it's only about 5 p.m. at the moment and I could head to the casino and put my name on the list, but honestly I think the waiting list will be very long. At this time they've always been really long in Queensland and Friday evenings is like especially longer, so I might wait a few hours before I go in just to avoid the wait. And in the spare time I think I'm going to check out the hotel pool, relax for a bit, but then we'll get into the poker. Let's go. It's about 7:30 p.m. and I've got my gym in, I've got my swim in. Now there's nothing left to do except for go play some poker. I think even at this time the list will still probably be pretty long, but we'll head down there, see what they're like. But the plan is to play all night, so even if we have to wait an hour or two, it'll be worth it to get some poker in on a Friday night. So heading over to the cast now, wish me luck. So we head into the casino and put our name on the list for every No Limit Hold'em game they were running. And after about an hour and a half, 2 hours, we finally get a seat on the 2-5, which is where we play this first hand. Loose aggressive player opens the cutoff to 15. Then an unknown small blind calls and I'm in the big blind with a 9-7 of spades. I decide to throw in the call here, so we go 3 ways to a flop of 9-8-3 with 2 diamonds. Small blind checks, I go ahead and check it to the pre-flop aggressor. They make it 25, the small blind folds, and with top pair here, I think we have a pretty clear decision to call, which is what I do. So we're heads up with the cutoff to a turn, which is the 4 of hearts. I check it over, and then the opponent goes ahead and bets 60. Definitely somewhat concerned that the opponent does have pretty much all of the overpairs in their range, as well as some even stronger hands like 9-8 suited, pocket 8s, pocket 3s, maybe even pocket 4s if they see betting pretty liberally. So definitely some concern that I'm behind here. Having said that though, we do have top pair, which is going to block a lot of my opponent's value bets of like ace-9 and king-9 and stuff like that. And it's just one of the stronger hands we have in our range in general. Not even to mention that the opponent could have jack-10, 6-7 or a flush draw, so pretty easy decision to call in my opinion, which is what I do. So we're heads up to the river, which is the 2 of hearts. I go ahead and check. This is where things get really interesting. The opponent bets again, but they decide to make it 225. So they actually decide to overbet the pot, which I wasn't really expecting. I don't think they would do this with a hand like an overpair, so I essentially think they're polarized to either 2-pair plus. And this river is a little bit scary. I didn't mention this on the flop, but I do think as a loose aggressive player, they're going to be c-betting pretty much everything. So a hand like 6-5 suited definitely could be on their range in the river. I'm concerned I lose to that, and then basically all of the sets except for pocket 2s I think they could definitely have. Having said that though, the front door flush did miss, as did jack-10 and 7-6, and this is a loose aggressive opponent, so if I'm going to give anyone credit for overbluffing in this spot, it might be then. So I definitely do want to defend with some of the hands in my range, and just comes down to is a 9-7 suited, one of the better ones to do it with. And the thing is, like, I think ace-9, king-9 would definitely be better calls because they sort of unblock those bluffs with the 7-6. Having said that though, like I said, this is a loose aggressive opponent. I think they might be overdoing it with bluffs and trying to shake off that folding station image that some of you think I have. So I did decide to throw in the call, and then the opponent shows jack-10 offsuit. So we scoop in this pot with a river hero call, and absolutely stoked that I held on with my top pair this time. Next hand, I'm under the gun with the second best hand in all of poker, pocket kings. I go ahead and raise it up to 10. using the min click open just because I think people were playing pretty tight at this table in general. So I open it up to 10, then the action gets round to an unknown hijack who 3-bets to 25, and then a player in the big blind who definitely been enjoying some of the casino cocktails throws in the call of the 25. The action's back on me and slam dunk spot to 4-bet. Probably would even 4-bet in a heads up dynamic, but the fact that we've got a third player in, there's just more value for me to get. I decide to 4-bet it up to 100, and it is a bit of a larger sizing for a 4-bet, but the big blind only has about 300 in their stack. I sort of want to make it a sizing where if they do call the 100, they're probably likely to stack off post flop with any type of like showdown value hand. So conventionally, maybe something like 75-80 would be a better sizing, but going a bit bigger, trying to stack the big blind, I go ahead and make it 100. Then the action's back to the hijack 3-better. They throw in the call, and then the action's to the big blind, and they end up folding the hand. So we're heads up to a flop of Jack 8-4 with 2 spades. The action's on me, and I think it's a good spot to have a range bet in a 4-bet pot. Being out of position, maybe there is a bit more incentive to check it over to the opponent, let them bet a worse hand. But in general, usually you're meant to bet as the 4-better with a range that has just basically like a ton of kings and aces, which you can bet for value. And I got the kings here, so I go ahead and bet it for value. I make it 70, then the action's on the opponent, and they raise it to 210. After this, the opponent only has 120 left in their stack, and look, I am somewhat concerned that the opponent could have A, slow played aces pre-flop, or B, hit a set with pocket jacks, or maybe even pocket eights. You know what, if they have one of those hands, power to them. I'm pretty happy to stack off here. I think if my opponent has pocket queens, they're going to call the all-in. I think if they have the nut flush draw, they're going to call the all-in, and that's sort of like, if they are overvaluing a hand, like ace-jack, you know, they probably figure they're behind when I rip it all in, but I think they'll sort of like shrug and call off anyway. I just don't want to be giving up the EV by folding a hand this strong, and some chance that they're just doing like an airball bluff with ace-10 or something like that, and then we're pretty happy to deny equity to that hand with a shove. So I go with it. I rip my stack all in, and then the opponent actually tanks like 5 seconds before calling. So yeah, the tank call is pretty much exactly what we wanted. If we got snapped off here, it would be pretty gross. The board runs out with a 5 and a 10. The front door flush doesn't get in. I show my hand, and then my opponent mucks their hand, and they actually said that they didn't put me on that hand, meaning pocket kings. Yeah, not really sure what they had. They did muck, so we'll never know, but don't really care because happy to rake in this pot. So after about another hour and a half, 2 hours, we finally do get called for the 5-5 game, and we move over, and then it ended up playing as a 5-5-10 game the entire night. So that's what we're playing for the rest of this session. Let's get into the first hand. An unknown under the gun player open limps, then the action's round to me on the button with ace king. I go ahead and make it 50, then I get a call from a loose aggressive small blind, and under the gun calls as well. So we're 3 ways to a flop of ace queen 9 rainbow. The action checks to me, and definitely want to go ahead and bet for value with ace king here. I go ahead and make it 55, then the small blind calls and under the gun folds. So we're heads up to a turn, which is the 8 of hearts, and then the small blind goes ahead and leads out for 125. The action's on me here, and I am somewhat concerned that my opponent could have all of the offsuit jack 10 combinations and they're leading because their straight got there. Having said that though, if they did float with a hand like king jack, king 10, or queen jack, and they're just deciding to turn it into a bluff, I definitely will give credit to a loose aggressive opponent for doing something like that. Absolutely cannot fold a hand as strong as ace king, so I throw in the call, and we're heads up to a river, which is the king of hearts completing the backdoor flush draw, and the opponent doesn't let up. They go ahead and bet 300. The action's on me here, and don't worry, I'm not going to fold in this spot. That will be way too tight with 2 pair. I don't even think it's somewhat possible our opponent could be betting a worse hand for value. 9-8 or queen 8, something like that would make sense with this line that they've taken, so definitely can't fold here. The question is whether I want to raise for thin value or just call. Like I said, my opponent could have a worse 2 pair in their range, but I think when the backdoor flush gets in and it's obvious to them I'm going to have a lot of ace king in my range, I definitely could see them going ahead and hero folding one of those hands, and then I'm sort of just free rolling myself if my opponent does have jack 10 or the backdoor flush. I think that would be way too thin to go ahead and raise for value here, so I do just call. My opponent says, oh, you're good, and then they end up mucking their cards, and very hot start to the 5-5-10 session. The dynamics for this next hand are very interesting, so keen to hear what you'll think of it, but the action folds to my cutoff, and I have 10-9 offsuit Usually this will be a pretty trivial fold, but I decided to go ahead and raise it up to 15 for reasons that'll become apparent in a minute. Tight aggressive button calls, then the action's on a small blind, and the thing about this villain is I actually legitimately think this is their first time playing live poker ever. Just the way they were handling chips, and they kept asking the dealer, like, how's the game played? I think they understood hand strengths and stuff like that, so they might have played, online poker at some point or something like that, but yeah, they just seemed pretty unfamiliar with what was going on in live poker environments, so I really do think it was their first time playing live poker, and it definitely affects the dynamics of the hand going forward, but they decide to call the 15. So we're three ways to a flop of 7-7-4 with two diamonds. Small blind checks it over to me, and we whiffed pretty hard on this board, and I really don't think we're going to be able to get a bluff through. The opponent, playing for their first time ever, wasn't very fond of folding hands that had any type of showdown value, so really not trying to bluff them. So I just check it, trying to see a free turn, and we get it because the button checks 2. The turn is the 8 of clubs. Small blind checks it over to us again, so definitely happy that we are open-ended here, but I don't even still want to semi-bluff. I think the small blind and the button both are going to have a lot of ace-high hands that'll probably defend to a bet here. It's just not a spot where I think I'm going to be able to realise much fold equity. Again, I would rather just get it to the river as cheaply as possible. So I do check, and the button checks again, so we get a free river. I'm very happy we did, because it was the 6 of clubs on the river. We river the nuts straight. Small blind goes ahead and checks it over to me, and now absolutely slam dunk spot to go ahead and bet for value. And I actually really want to overbet this pot, just because I think if either of the opponents have a 5, like, they're not going to fold if I bet them. So I go ahead and bet 60, and as soon as I bet the 60, the small blind's like, 60? I made it 60, then the action's on the button first, and they do think about it for like 15 seconds before calling. Then the small blind looks a bit confused, and I think they intuitively realise that I'm pretty strong here, but whatever the case, they do throw in the call. I end up showing my hand. The button mucks straight away, and then the small blind goes ahead and shows ace-5 offsuit. So they actually did have a 5 themselves, and they're not going to be able to fold that hand the way this hand played it out. So very happy to rake in this pot, and I did overbet the river. It is interesting to note, though, that my opponent did find it suspicious when I bet so large, even with a hand as strong as a 5. I think they intuitively sussed out that I was really strong in that spot. So I don't know if I'm just giving off that vibe when I do have a really strong hand, or maybe it was just obvious from the way I bet. Next hand, a professional from Sydney opens the button to 30, and the action's on my straddle with ace-queen offsuit. Already a pretty interesting decision whether we want to 3-bet or just call. Definitely a lot of merit to both options, and I really don't think you can go wrong here, as long as you're not folding pre-flop. I decided to call in this instance. Having a strong ace-x in your straddle defense range is really good, because the button's going to be opening a bunch of offsuit junky aces, which are going to dominate on ace-high boards. So I throw in the call, and then we're heads up to a flop of 5-5-4 rainbow. I check it over to the opponent, they see bet 35, and I make what I think is a pretty uncontroversial decision to call here. So we're heads up to the turn, which is the ace of clubs putting out backdoor clubs. I really don't like leading in this spot, just because I think if my opponent does have a bluff like 6-7 suited, 9-8 suited, something that turn backdoor clubs, like, they're definitely going to go ahead and bet on this turn, which is so good for their range. So really want to give them the opportunity to bluff, and also potentially bet off a worse ace-x hand. So I check it over to them. And I think you could either check raise or check call. I think both of those options would make sense, but we don't get to make that decision because the opponent does check back. Then we're heads up to a river, which is the jack of clubs. Now, pretty interesting decision here, whether we want to lead out or we want to go for a bit of a check raise. And if I did think my opponent had a lot of worse ace-x hands, I would like going for a check raise here, but I do think they're going to bet a lot of those on the turn. Really do discount them a lot of ace-x hands in their range. So I think they're more likely to have a worse showdown, something like pocket sixes through pocket kings. I think when my opponent has that sort of like weaker showdown driven range, in general, I'm going to want to use a lot of large bet sizes with some of my bluffs. And I'm going to have a lot of bluffs in this board the way the thing played out. I think I should balance that out and use a large bet size with some of my value hands as well. An ace queen is probably one of the stronger hands we're going to have on this run out, so I decide to go ahead and bet 175. Then my opponent sort of scrunches up their face, thinks for maybe like 5 seconds before folding their hand. So we're going to rake in this pot, but what do you think about my river sizing? Is it a bit too big? Could I go a bit smaller and try and eke out a bit of thin value? Let me know in the comments below. Next hand, I'm under the gun with ace-4 of hearts. I open it to 25, then the action's round to a tight aggressive straddle, who throws in the call. So it heads up to a flop of Jack 4-3 with 2 spades. When the opponent checks it over to me, pretty interesting decision whether we want to c-bet or not. I kind of do want to bet out just for a bit of thin value / equity denial with the hand as vulnerable as middle pair top kicker here. But checking it back with a more middling strength hand that you can definitely put in a calling range on the turn does make a lot of sense as well. So I really could see going either way. In game, I did decide to bet just for that equity denial reason. I went ahead and made it 50. And then my opponent doesn't think too long before throwing in the call. So it heads up to a turn, which is the king of clubs. The opponent checks it over to me, and now I kind of want to just tech back and try and, get to showdown basically with my showdown value hand. I do think if I was to have a bluff, I would definitely bet on this turn. But if we start doing it with a mergy type of range, it's kind of inefficient just because I think our opponent's going to play pretty well against it and just call with better, fold worse. Maybe we can get them off some better hands, but I don't really think this is the spot where I want to extend my neck and risk that much when I do have showdown value. So I do just check it back and we're off to see a free river, which is the Jack of clubs repeating top pair. And then the opponent bets 65. The action's on me here, and a pretty interesting spot. My opponent definitely could have a bunch of stronger hands in their range. King Queen, King 10 make a lot of sense. They definitely could have a few Jack X hands. The thing is though, the second Jack on the river does block the combinations of Jack X that my opponent can have. So I'm really more worried about King X as a hand I'd lose to, but I think they're going to have a bunch of hands that are like Ace 5 offsuit, Ace 9 suited, a bunch of those worse hands that they might go ahead and bet just because this river is kind of scary, and I'm going to have a lot of weaker like Ace X hands in my range that aren't going to be able to call off. So I do think it is a good spot for the opponent to be applying some pressure, and the fact that they have used a smaller bet size, we're getting a really good price to see if they are bluffing or not. So I do decide to throw in the call, and then my opponent's like, I don't have much before showing Queen 3 offsuit. So they actually had bottom pair and turned it into a bluff, and I'm very happy they did because we're going to rake in this pot. So one last interesting hand before we wrap this thing up. A passive player open limps the cutoff, and then a tight aggressive Melbourne reg goes ahead and opens the button to 45, and then I'm in small blind with pocket 10s. Conventionally, this will be a pretty easy 3-bet spot, small blind versus button, but the dynamics are going to be a little bit tighter when they are ISO raising over a limper, but still not tight enough for me to go ahead and fold 10s. I do 3-bet it up to 190, then the cutoff folds and the button throws in the call. So it heads up to a flop of 9 deuce deuce rainbow. The action's on me here, and I do want to go ahead and bet my hand for equity denial / value. Can get floated by a few worse like pocket 7s, pocket 6s, and if we do fold out a hand like King Queen, then we're pretty happy to do so. So I go ahead and bet 125. Then my opponent thinks about it for maybe like 10 seconds before throwing in the call. So it heads up to a turn, which is the Jack of clubs putting out backdoor clubs. The action's on me, and I don't think there's much more value in betting anymore. I think my opponent could have a few stronger hands in their range. I definitely think Ace Jack might float on the flop, particularly when I bet small. Additionally, pocket jacks and pocket aces are, maybe even pocket queens, are definitely hands they might not want to 4-bet pre-flop. I mean, I probably would, but it could be a good spot to just mix in a call occasionally with those hands. So there are a few things we lose to, and if my opponent does have pocket 6s, pocket 7s, like they're probably just going to fold if I go ahead and bet here. So I think pocket 10s is a pretty slam dunk hand to check here. And I would be mixing in a check with some of my over pairs as well. So I go ahead and check it, and then the action's on my opponent. And I think maybe a good like 15 seconds-ish again before going ahead and betting 300. The action's back on me now, and like I said, definitely concerned there are a few hands where behind. My opponent could have Ace Jack, but the thing is, if they could have a hand like Ace Jack that they floated on the flop, couldn't they have Ace Queen as well? Maybe Ace King, maybe like Ace 10 suited with the backdoor flush draw. Like, I do think they have a few bluffs in their range, and, it is a bit dicey because they do have strong hands for sure, but don't want to go ahead and fold a hand this strong yet when I do think it is a good spot for my opponent to potentially bluff. So I throw in the call, and then we're heads up to a river, which is the 6 of spades. I go ahead and check it over to the opponent again. Really not a good spot to lead. I think my opponent's turn bet was pretty polarized, and I'm either way ahead or way behind. So I check it over to the opponent, and then they're in the tank for probably like 60 seconds or so. Then I don't know what I guess they're thinking, whether they're going to bet or not. The SPR's less than 1, so I think they're either going all in or they're just checking back. And they're in the tank for about a minute before like sighing and checking back, and then because it's Gold Coast rules, I have to show my hand first. I show the pocket tens, and then my opponent ends up mucking. So raking in a pretty big pot here, which is nice. Would have been absolutely sick if my opponent did shove the river, but apparently it would have been a bluff. And they actually insinuate later that they had king queen, because they said 10 for me on the river would have been really bad. So I guess they would have got there with the straight. And very happy to rake in this pot. I think this is the biggest pot I've played so far since coming up to the Gold Coast, so very happy to be on the winning end of it. And also pretty happy to not get bluffed off, because I think I might have folded if my opponent went all in on the river. So those were the most interesting hands I played across the session, and in terms of my gameplay grade, I'm going to do it. I'm giving myself an A today. I was very happy with the vast majority of decisions I made across this session. Still a few mistakes. I do think overbetting the river with ace queen probably did cost me a bit of value. If I bet something between like half pot and full pot, they're probably more likely to call with one of those showdown hands. They're probably more likely to call with one of the hands in the range that is very showdown driven in my opinion, so pretty big mistake there. But other than that, I really don't think I made any egregious errors, honestly, and really happy that I was like focused and paying attention. One of the things I really like that I did at this session is I actually gave my opponents credits for bluffs in their range, which I have been not the best at doing in the past, admittedly, but I think a combination of people needling me in my comment section for being in it and me just getting more adapted at, okay, they could have like the offsuit combination of this, it does make a good spot for me to mix in more hero calls, and I think that's reflected in the results. I'm improving at poker, I'm getting better at ranging my opponents, and my results are improving. The one thing that I will admit about this session is I did run very, very good, and it's a lot easier to play your A game when you're running good and you're picking up hands. I think that has biased my gameplay grade, in all honesty, but still very happy with how I played. Even like outside of poker, I'm glad that I got a workout in before the session. I socialized with friends about non-poker stuff as well. It was just a very balanced day, and I think that contributed to good play for myself tonight. I really do think this is one of the best sessions I've had in a while. I think part of that is just coming up to the Gold Coast with some mates, people who are better at poker than myself I can shoot ideas off of, and just get in that more like competitive strategic mindset. Being at home by yourself, you definitely do miss that. You know, you can have Skype calls and text messages. It's not the same as being in person and shooting the shit with your mates about poker strategy, and I definitely think that's helped improve my game since I've been up here, and it's culminated in what has been my best performance at the live poker table in quite a while. I only needed to buy in for 1k in the initial 5-5 game, and was very fortunate to run it up to 2,742, so by far the biggest win of the trip so far. And yeah, I want to be results oriented. I definitely ran well in good games today. I'm still pretty happy overall. That's going to wrap it up for today. Thank you for sticking all the way to the end of the vlog. That really helps my channel's analytics, and I do appreciate it. If you haven't already, hop in the comments below and give me your thoughts on the hand histories I played this session. But for now, I'm out of here. Peace.